what we're going to be effectively going through today is how the threat landscape's changed. I've worked in IT now since 1998, so a fair amount of time, and I've seen the landscape change massively over the last 27 years. It's changed a lot. Sometimes it changes quicker than others. There's some years there seems to be a little bit of a change. Some years there seems to be quite a lot of change, but the one consistent thing that I have seen is that there is always change. And as that threat landscape changes, we need to adapt to it. So we're going to be talking a little bit about why kind of the current EDR tooling isn't enough, and kind of what MDR does. I'm going to apologize now for the amount of three-letter acronyms that we'll throw out today. We seem to be really bad for that in our industry and in the IT world. So hopefully Robert's going to paint a fairly high-level picture. The idea is not to get too technical today. That's not what we're intending on doing. We want to keep this quite high level. So, Robert, I'm going to pass over to you now. But first of all, could you just tell us a little bit more about your role at Blackpoint Cyber, who Blackpoint Cyber are, and just give us a bit of a flavour of that, if you'd be so kind.
Absolutely. Thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everyone. Super excited to be joining you all today. Really excited to have this kind of conversation. What I do currently is, as Phil said, I'm the Senior Director of Threat Operations at Blackpoint Cyber. I oversee our entire MDR SOC operation. I oversee our detection engineering team. I work extremely closely with threat intelligence, threat research, everything kind of within Blackpoint Cyber, really to make sure at the end of the day, all we are attempting to do is make sure that our partners, their end clients are safe from the cyber threats, right? And that landscape, as Phil said, it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. A little bit about my previous work experience. I had some time as a law enforcement officer. I did some time actually as a pest control branch manager, and I've done a significant amount of time in the cybersecurity landscape. The reason why I bring up those other two, I will use a number of different analogies, and that time and experience in the pest control industry and law enforcement really helps kind of inform when I came into cybersecurity and understanding what is it and how do threat actors, just like different pests, just like different criminals, how do they kind of sidestep some of the different boundaries, gateways, security infrastructure that may be in place to try and stop them? And then how do we continue to play this game of chess, if you will? So super excited to join you, Phil, and excited to have this conversation today.
Cool. All right. That's really interesting. Actually, I know the background of Blackpoint, and I know John Murchison, who started it. I think I met him a couple of years ago at a conference over in the States, and yeah, he more or less said, "Look, I want to try and create something that would stop someone like me," and I really sort of resonated with that. So we preach about managed user awareness and multi-factor authentication and next generation antivirus, and like I said at the start, why are they not enough, Robert? What is it about those things that doesn't cut the mustard today?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So to intro Blackpoint and exactly what you said, for those of you that don't know John, he was a former NSA computer network operation expert, right? And so what that looks like is he was attempting to do the very types of things that we are trying to prevent. And so, in my opinion, one of the reasons why Blackpoint Cyber has been so successful, it's different from other security vendors or providers. And the aspect of everything starts with what we call red team mindset, right? It comes from how do threat actors actually operate? What are things that they're doing in the real landscape? So instead of reading about something, instead of, looking at what we could implement for a new detection rule or signature based on things that are already out where you're reacting to it, instead, everything is very proactive of how do we get in front of the next move that the cyber criminal is going to operate in. So Blackpoint Cyber, again, founded by John, NSA computer network operation expert, others from NSA, US Department of Defense, which is where some of my experience comes from, Microsoft, Cisco, and a bunch of kind of other major organizations have people very focused on how to build something that can stop threat actors. A couple of things that we'll talk about is, your question of why are some of the things that used to be enough no longer enough? And so one of the things that we talk about to start with is that distinction of that cyber threat landscape. So if you look the left side of the screen, it used to be that criminals, cyber criminals specifically, used a lot of things that were just simple malware is the best way for me to describe it. They had signatures that were on them. Those signatures can relatively easily be caught by antivirus and endpoint detection and response solutions. AV and EDR logic was very good at catching things that were known bad, right? If it has a malicious signature, it's a piece of malware. AV EDR can kind of stop that all day long. What we've seen in the cyber threat landscape is that threat actors, again, if you think of this almost like a game of chess, we made a move with things like AVs and EDRs, and then threat actors decided to start making a move as well, where instead of using only malware, they would start to use additional tradecraft tactics, techniques, procedures, TTPs. And what that looks like is they would get access into a system, and we'll talk some about initial access. They would get access into a system, and then from there, they would do things like laterally spread to different systems, and they would use tools that's already in place on that system to be able to do nefarious activity. So instead of relying on malware to do all of the different malicious things that they were trying to do, they would use things that are embedded in a regularly running Windows operating system. So great example that most people are familiar with is even like the command shell or PowerShell. Those are two things that we classify as living off the land binaries. They're native on Windows environments. If you're a sysadmin, those things are very typical behavior. It's very difficult for an AV or EDR, a lot of times near impossible, for an AV or EDR to understand whether something is malicious solely based on that, because PowerShell and command prompt, those aren't malicious in and of themselves. You need that additional context.
Okay. So what you're basically saying there, Robert, is that if I'm a bad actor, and again, I apologize for some of the narrative that we use in the IT industry, but we call them bad actors, right? So if I'm a bad actor, I know you're going to have probably a very good next generation antivirus product. So I deliberately don't try and trip that wire. A bit like if I wanted to break into a house, well, I know you're going to have an alarm system. I know you're going to have locks on the door. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and come in another way. I'm going to try and read your electricity meter or something like that. So actually, I don't trip any alarms off. So what you're saying is when someone gets through by using that tradecraft that you mentioned before, your antivirus isn't going to pick it up because to all intents and purposes, there isn't actually anything suspicious that's really happening, right?
Absolutely. And that's actually, it's a great point to talk about that initial access vector. So they actually take it up a notch, especially when we see sophisticated threat actors. What they will do is these EDR platforms, whatever EDR you want to talk about, they're available to purchase. And so these threat actors will purchase one of these EDRs, will set it up within their own sandbox, and they will run whatever they are going to run as a test against this EDR until they can get it to a point that will not detect. So they already know before they even start that they're going to be able to bypass it because they were able to bypass it in their test environment. And so again, just like you said, you think of a criminal, right, who maybe does like a breaking and entering in some type of robbery. If we go back in time, there didn't used to be cameras and lasers and things that caught motion and all this kind of stuff. And so a malicious criminal could just break in somewhere, steal whatever they want, and kind of have a Wild West showdown maybe out front. But now that there's different things like cameras, like lasers, like motion detectors, it's not that breaking and enterings no longer happen. It's changed, right? That thing that used to potentially stop it, your glass window that would stop most people, no longer is an efficient solution. And so with this, especially when we start talking about the differentiation, we start talking about how an EDR isn't able to keep up with some of the tradecraft that's being done because it's just not built for that purpose. And one of the things that, I talk about sort of a lot is I try not to be too blunt, but I talk about a screen door, right? And so if you have a screen door that's on your house, that's going to stop things that was intended to stop. It is going to stop flies and mosquitoes from, joining you in your house and potentially biting you. But if there was something, right, I don't know whether there's very large animals that you could think of, right? Like if I think of like a wildlife preserve or something like that, if there was a bear that was trying to get into your house, A screen door is not going to stop that bear. But that screen door was never designed to stop the bear. So it's not the screen door is bad or ineffective. It's just the
Right.
threats of what you are looking to do have changed, right? And so it's similar in that nature of EDRs certainly aren't bad. They are a layer of security, but threat actors have changed so much that they're ineffective to what the current cyber threat landscape as a standalone solution is.
Okay, cool. You've kind of alluded to it already, Robert, but could you just walk us through at a quite a low level, a detailed level of what a breach kind of typically looks like from the initial stages through to execution? You've already mentioned that there's a lot of reconnaissance happening, but could you just talk about the average dwell time, just kind of double click into that tradecraft a little bit more?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we're seeing most of the time, and it depends again, whether we're talking about something that's on premise or whether we're talking about cloud response, but they follow unique chains. And what those chains really look like, as you said, it really starts with reconnaissance, right? And it depends on the sophistication of the threat actor. That reconnaissance can be anywhere from a couple hours of just some internet searches to find something out about the company, all the way to honestly weeks and months of deep, detailed research on everything about an individual company, right? A lot of people have social media accounts where they share a lot of different information. These threat actors will try and get as much information as they can from a reconnaissance standpoint because that initial access is really where they need to make a differentiation, if you will, right? And so they will find some sort of way to be able to build a relationship or be able to identify different systems being used by a company or whatever it may be. If they can find enough stuff out about an individual at the company, they'll try social engineering tactics. They will do different phishing emails that are specifically targeted for individuals, especially with the rise of AI. And I won't talk significantly about AI in this presentation. Social engineering emails, phishing emails are becoming a lot more realistic and more difficult to detect. I often say this as well, right? We talk again a little bit here about a house, and this is where I talk about pest control. I don't know if any of you have the same type of issue, but it seems like no matter how solidified I make the exterior of my house, I always find ladybugs in my house. Like it doesn't matter, right? I believe I could put saran wrap around my entire house and I would still somehow find ladybugs that got into my house. And the reason why that's important is because no matter how secure we think the perimeter is, if we're trying to secure that perimeter as being the end all be all, it will stop everything. It just won't. There's too many gaps. There's too many critical vulnerabilities that happen. There's too many things that can be exploited that threat actors can find their way into an initial access. And so then what you're left with is the next steps of the attack chain of once they land on a system, they got initial access, they did their reconnaissance, they land on a system. At that point, their tradecraft is exactly what they're going to be reliant on. They're going to be looking to laterally spread to different systems in the environment. They're going to be looking to discover what does that network look like? What does that environment look like? They're going to be looking to escalate their privileges to be able to execute different things. And again, what we're seeing now is they're going to be doing all of those things with built-in tools to try and lower the possibility of them being detected. So we'll see them do all of that. They'll do the lateral spread. They will do discovery in the network. They will do privilege escalation. They'll be looking around at the different types of things that are in the network. And then once they identify something that's extremely useful to them, we're seeing a lot of double extortion ransomware. And so they will exfiltrate or they will pull a lot of information out from your systems, the sensitive data. They'll pull out different data about all of the employees, pay systems, whatever it may be. They'll pull that out and exfiltrate it, and then they will encrypt that environment. And now what the issue is again, it used to be that they would just ransom an environment, right? They would come in, they would encrypt everything, and then they would say, hey, we want you to give us a whole bunch of money, and then we will unencrypt it. The response to that oftentimes was no, keep your encryption. We have backups and the backups are good. We'll restore from the backup. And really, you may have taken us down for a day or two. We're all set. We'll restore from our backup. What they found is with this double extortion, it's no longer so much about the encryption because if you have a really good backup system, that's phenomenal. But if they have all of your sensitive data still, they will say, if you don't pay this, not only will we not decrypt or unencrypt your environment, we will also start selling all of this sensitive information on the dark web. And so that's really, again, kind of the walkthrough of the chain, if you will, of what they're looking to do all the way through actions on objective.
Thanks, Robert. There's a couple of things I want to pick out of there, and I'm actually speaking from experience here in terms of things we've seen within our customer base. I think it's really important to have an idea of what data you have in your business and classifying it, because again, I'll anonymize this little story. We had a client who actually had an MDR solution in place, and even with that MDR solution, they found themselves compromised. Now, there was a few reasons why it happened. It's a bit of a long story, but effectively, the bad actors managed to get through, and they did actually exfiltrate a small amount of data. But because of the fact that they had the MDR tooling in place, we knew what had been taken, when it had been taken, and actually we realized that the data that had been exfiltrated was quite benign and it wasn't important. So then we managed to recover them. But because we had logs in place, we knew how long they'd been in the environment, because what we don't want to do from a recovery point of view is inadvertently recover you back to a point where the bad thing's already there, if that makes sense. So having that sense of chronology from having the logs in place, which is what Blackpoint brings us, it allows us to be able to recover you. Now, can you imagine if the bad thing had been in your environment for a month? I mean, who would want to ever restore their business to a month ago? You'd probably go out of business. So I think what we're trying to do in all of this, if we boil it all down, is we're trying to minimize the chance of it happening in the first place, and if it does happen, being able to recover really quickly and minimize any disruption. So I'm hearing, Robert, and again, speaking from experience here, that around 70% of breach activity that your team's responding to on a weekly basis is in the cloud. Can you respond to this one, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll talk, as far as for what it looks like for MDR, and we'll talk about what we see on the cloud. When you're looking for that MDR, I think it's extremely important of what you said, right? Of they were in the environment for maybe a month, right? And so right before I answer kind of the cloud response, it's important to understand that, again, if we look at it as the house as an analogy, if you had a security guard that was standing outside of your house and their job was to watch the front door, right? When a threat actor gets in and they get in through the side door, the back door, a window, whatever it may be, that guard was not watching, that threat actor's then in your house and can do sort of whatever they want. Where the MDR provider steps into that whole attack chain that we just talked about is the MDR providers, like if you had security guards inside your house, right? That initial access vector is not as important as once they are inside your house, there are going to be things that are being done in that house. And so it's an MDR provider who can really start looking at that tradecraft. All of the things I mentioned. So reconnaissance, that's happening all of the time. There is no good way to stop reconnaissance. It's just not possible. You can minimize your footprint, but if you are a business, you have to have some sort of social public footprint, if you will, right? And so there's no good way to minimize reconnaissance. Initial access, I already talked about it. My opinion, that's somewhat of a losing battle. There are too many gaps, too many holes, too many vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have good attack surface management, but it's a losing battle if you want to secure the perimeter and say, I will never let another ladybug in my house. It's just not going to happen. They're going to find a way in, right? And so once they're inside, though, and they're looking to do that lateral spread, they're looking to do that privilege escalation, they're doing discovery within the network, and they're trying to do actions on whether it be exfiltration, whether it be encryption. It's important to have that security guard inside that's watching someone saying, hey, you're not meant to be here, and what you're doing is different. You don't look like the homeowner. You don't look like the person who's authorized to do that. And so having an MDR provider that can do some of these things that are human-led to understand the context and bring all of it, that modern SOC functions, and then threat disruption, threat containment is huge. But regarding what you're talking about the cloud, this is something that is really, really interesting. When we bring partners on with Blackpoint, one of the things that we find is 1 in 5, once they bring on Blackpoint, find that there's already a business email compromise that is ongoing in their environment. That's a major statistic when you really think about it. 1 in 5 organizations come on with Blackpoint and they see that they already have some sort of business email compromise that's ongoing. It just talks about how prolific it is right now, specifically on the cloud side. And so the statistic that you were using is absolutely spot on. In fact, it's actually probably increased even a little bit since then. So we are responding to significant business email compromises, attempted business email compromises on a daily basis. And the reality of that is right now, the way that the world has went is everything now is done remotely, right? And so there's so much that's going into cloud infrastructure that has become a new attack surface. The other reason why, those things like an email address, that's all public information as far as it's not difficult at all to figure out what your system for your company is for an email address structure. If I know that and I know the name of your CEO and I know that you all do a first initial dot last name at your domain, now all of a sudden I know the CEO's email. If I put together a really good spear phishing email where I can get him to give me his credentials unknowingly, I now have access to the CEO's account. Imagine the kind of damage I could do as a threat actor with that kind of information, much easier than trying to get access to an on-prem environment. I now am the CEO effectively, right? Communications I send out look like they're coming from the CEO's environment.
Thanks, Robert. So again, you've kind of answered some of these, the question about asking somewhere anyway. But what are you doing to address these concerns, and how do you work with us, I guess, as a partner, if a scenario unfolds?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, right? So we integrate with, all of the main EDR players. So we just talked about why EDR is inefficient alone. But again, no one's going to tell you, hey, if you're having an issue with, ladybugs getting in your house, you should open all your windows and open all your doors. That will fix your problem, right? That's not the effective solutions. We're not saying you need to remove different layers of security. What we are saying, though, is you need something in the environment that is looking for that specific threat actor tradecraft. And so the way that Blackpoint addresses all of this is threat actors, once they're in an environment, will do very similar things, right? There's only so many ways that you can look to laterally spread between an endpoint and, let's say, a domain controller. There's only so many ways.
Sorry, Robert, it is the endpoint, which is quite a large attack surface, isn't it?
It is, very much so.
Yeah.
And that's where we find most of kind of that initial compromise that happens.
Yeah. So it's not coming in through your firewall. It's not coming in off a VM. It tends to be a user that it's coming in from.
A majority of stuff that we see is user executed, right? And so again, we talk about some of those phishing emails that happen. We talk about people that there's a campaign, and Blackpoint actually wrote a blog on this very recently and published it, the fake CAPTCHA, right? So if you're used to going online and it clicks, I'm not a robot, I'm a human. Threat actors have found a way to make that malicious. They have found a way to build in some of their different malicious payloads, and it's a user clicking on that will execute the payload. So it's not even the malicious threat actor that has to do something. It's user executing, user activated, that they embed that, and once they click on that, the user executed and download whatever the next stage of that malicious activity is that allows threat actors access into that environment. So you're 100% correct on that.
So I know the answer to the next question, but I think it's important to ask it for our customers. Imagine it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you've spotted some nefarious activity. There's something that doesn't look quite right. What actually happens in real life, Robert? What does the playbook say?
Absolutely.
To do?
So Blackpoint specifically, and MDR providers, if they're a good MDR provider, are very aggressive in their containment action. So again, we talk about MDR. Part of what it brings to the table is that contextual analysis. So if I give you an example, I say a local administrator, did a lateral spread to the domain controller and there was some activity. You may sit there and say, that's not really that important. But what if I told you that what that looked like was during off hours, a user that we had never seen laterally spread before was laterally spreading to this domain controller. What they were doing is they were trying to execute from a privileged basis something that historically we had never seen happen before. All of a sudden, that context that the MDR brings is that's malicious activity. Blackpoint Cyber locks that down immediately. We isolate the devices, we disable accounts, whatever it may be. We take containment action to make sure that threat actors are stopped in their tracks. And then that partnership is exactly what it looks like. We call the partner immediately upon containment. We don't wait for the partner and say, hey, we're seeing this and we think it's malicious. What do you want us to do about it? You all are busy. You all have different things going on. We take that containment action, ensure the threat actors are stopped in their tracks, and then we call you and we say, hey, this is what's going on. You have this compromised machine, these compromised users. Right now, everything is isolated and contained. And then that's where the partnership comes in. We help walk you through what remediation efforts should look like. We walk you through recommendations that we would have. And even if it's something where a backup is needed, we give you the time frame of when we're seeing different items of persistence. We can help guide you into, hey, we recommend that you restore from a backup that's at least this old to know that you're restoring from a good backup.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out as well as even before this gets implemented. So from a statement of works point of view, a lot of you who are on this call already know how we work. But if we think this is the right solution for you and you end up proceeding with it, as we onboard you onto the platform, we effectively write some scenarios. So if something happens at 3 o'clock in the morning, some of the type of customer profiles that we work with, they don't have any IT at all. So we're going to get the phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're empowered previously because we'll have agreed that to do whatever we need to do. Or we can have it where Blackpoint can not ring us at all. Some of our customers have quite competent in-house IT teams. We don't need to be involved. So there isn't really a one size fits all. There is a middle ground as well where Blackpoint will ring TrueStack and we'll get out of bed, and also they'll ring you as an end user and you can get out of bed. So it's really important when we're onboarding this to set out what that playbook looks like, because it's not the same for everybody. Is there anything else from a scenario point of view that you wanted to cover, Robert? Because I've got a couple of things which I can add in from an experience point of view, if not.
Absolutely. So, one thing that's important on what you said, exactly like you said, that partnership can be customized. The one thing that doesn't change, though, is the unwavering security that Blackpoint provides on the back end, right? Is regardless of whether you want to call it 3 a.m., you don't want to call it 3 a.m., we are 24/7, 365. We provide that security. We lock down accounts. And if it's that you all want an email, you'll come in the morning to an email that lets you know that we did this type of identification, we did this type of containment. We give you a full instant response report of all of the actions that happened. And then the other thing is we do threat hunting proactively. And so one of the great parts about being a partner for an MDR provider, for Blackpoint, for TrueStack, is the fact that you don't have to be the one that has something malicious happening in your environment to benefit from it. When we see any type of activity going on from a threat actor, we have a full threat intelligence, threat research team, and detection engineering team. Every incident that happens, they do a full review. If there's new detections that are built, they're deployed globally. When we do threat hunting, if we see this fake CAPTCHA stuff that we've been seeing all the time, when we see the indicators for that, we threat hunt globally for our entire partner base proactively with no alerts to make sure that you all are secure from that no one's messed with anything, that no one's touched any of that. And so it's really confirming that you all are safe. And so the last couple of things I had, just like you said, they're honestly just a couple of different examples. One of the things that we talk about when there is malicious activity that happens, we see everything from very fast execution all the way to very slow. I mean, honestly, sometimes up to months that like a threat actor was in an environment, someone will onboard and we will be able to identify a threat actor's in your environment. And because of the persistence mechanisms that they've used, we can see that they've been in that environment for months. And so anyhow, once they onboard with Blackpoint, we take care of that. But one of the things we talk about, there are times that an EDR will stop a portion of a malicious execution. The problem is it won't stop all of it. And so this was an example. What happened, right? There was a suspicious script that was run. We were alerted to that by one of the EDR integrations that we have. So we were alerted that there was this malicious script. The EDR said, this was killed. This is good. We're all set. Blackpoint doesn't take that recommendation lightly. Whenever we see something like that, we make sure that we do a full comprehensive threat hunt. So we did a full threat hunt, and once we did that, what we identified is even though the EDR system had killed this initial execution, upon immediately running that initial execution, it had set up persistence mechanisms and also had set up some things in the netstat where it was calling essentially to command and control or a C2 node. And so there was already communications happening with the threat actor, and there was already persistence in the form of a scheduled task that was on the system that the EDR didn't touch. It didn't even know that it was there. And so the EDR killed the first initial part of the execution, said, we're good. Meanwhile, the threat actor's already moved on, and they're already trying to communicate with the device through an established communication channel via C2 node, and they already have persistence via scheduled task. So Blackpoint, we did all of the initial additional investigation, threat hunting. We killed everything. We isolated the device. We took care of the persistence mechanisms. We isolated the device, and we immediately kind of called the partner and talked. So it's just another example where even when the EDR stops some of it, how can you be confident and sure that stopping all of it unless there's someone there to look at what that looks like?
Well, I think you've just answered one of the questions which I asked at the start is, why is EDR no longer good enough? And if you just think about EDR as almost like NGAV, next generation antivirus, a lot of our clients are using Bitdefender, for example. Just spinning back to that onboarding, I would say the majority of our customers, they want us to almost act first. So, if we think something's suspicious, let's quarantine it. Let's quash that straight away. Let's treat it as suspicious until confirmed it's not suspicious, and then we can always reinstate it. It'd be much better to act cautiously than to not act cautiously. I think that's definitely the way to go there. And just a little point on the partnership and why we chose Blackpoint, really. So as an MSP, we've got 65 staff, right? And we're very good at what we do. We've got managed service teams, consultancy teams, but they're limited in what they can do. So we wanted to choose a partner that had all of those skills in-house that would complement us. So if you think of us as like the local jungle guide, so it's 3 o'clock in the morning, something's gone horribly wrong. Blackpoint have identified it, and they can provide some of that remediation advice. But more often than not, we're the ones that have implemented your firewalls. We've built your Veeam infrastructure. We've built your VMware environment. We understand your Active Directory. So from a practical point of view, that's where we come in. So I'm never going to be able to compete, and I don't think any MSP could compete with someone like Blackpoint. Some MSPs have chosen to buy tooling internally and then build a team of 2 or 3, 4, 5 people to do what Blackpoint are doing. Well, myself and Russell Henderson and the rest of the senior leadership team at TrueStack, we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to go and buy some tooling and then build a SOC team around it. I could never compete with what Blackpoint are doing. So I just wanted to get that out there. Robert, you've got a vast team. This is what you do for a living, and I think the notion of partnership is really important. And it's the same as in our customer base. We've got some IT teams some customers who've got very competent IT teams, but we complement you. And that's what Blackpoint are doing for us. They're complementing our skills, and we bring that to you as a customer. But it is very much a partnership. So I just wanted to get that across, Robert. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that in terms of...
You're absolutely right. The partnership is how we operate the best, because we, just like you all, we are very good at what we do, but we couldn't take your role as the MSP, right? We are very good at the security business. We understand this. This is what we eat, sleep, and breathe, right? As I'm talking right now to you all, I have a full threat intelligence team that they are diving into all of the threat intelligence that's happened, not only from open source articles of what's being discussed worldwide, but they're also diving into everything that we've been seeing over the last little bit. Are there gaps in any detection logic where we need to change that? I have a technical director that, as we speak, is reviewing any incident recently to understand, is there detection logic that could have caught this further left of boom or left of when we initially caught that threat actor, right? And so every day...
Robert, explain left of boom and right of boom, because I think it's a really interesting concept. Sorry, I didn't want to stop your flow there, but it is really, really interesting.
It is, it's a very interesting concept that we have, and it can be defined in so many number of ways, right? And so some people describe boom as when something nefarious or malicious happens within an environment, right? Some people consider boom upon that initial access that a threat actor happens. The way I was using it in the conversation I was just having, boom for me and my team is once we identify that there was a threat actor in the environment, right? What was the first alert that we had that something was off, that there was some sort of suspicious activity that was going on? And then the goal is constantly moving further left of that. How close can I get to making it that they don't even get inside the walls? How close can I get to making sure that they stay outside of the house? How close can I get to making sure that if I see something that's sourcing from an anomalous location on the perimeter, a big one that we've been seeing is from SSL VPNs that have the management interface open and exposed to the public, right? And so what we see threat actors do is they will get legitimate credentials, again, either through phishing or through social engineering or just by brute force. They'll get legitimate credentials and or they'll exploit one of the many vulnerabilities on those edge devices, and then they'll log in with legitimate credentials to that VPN. No EDR is going to stop that because the EDRs aren't even looking at the SSL VPN. They will then laterally spread from that VPN to an endpoint. We are now far enough left of boom that we see that initial spread and we say that's bad, right? Why would there is no system administrator that's going to go straight from an SSL VPN, log in from there and jump immediately to the DC. They're not going to do that, right? That's the way that threat actors move. It's not the way that a regular system administrator would move. And so we constantly are looking to see how can we identify things as early in the chain as possible to make it that threat actors have as little time as possible in that environment.
Yeah, very good. And I guess right of boom is when you're mopping up the mess.
Right of
Yeah,
boom is where we never want to be. Right? Right
yeah,
of boom,
yeah.
right? Especially as the industry defines it. Again, I was using it slightly differently because for me, it's very aggressive of how do we constantly move further left as close as we can to initial access. For the industry, that right of boom is often really bad things. Right of boom is normally once ransomware has been deployed, once exfiltration has happened, once things are encrypted and you no longer have access to your data. Right of boom is normally when you're in a really not good spot.
Yeah, and like I said, we've had some customers who they haven't implemented things like MDR. They've been compromised, and we've been right of boom before with the customers, and I can tell you now, it's awful. No, we don't like being there. The customer definitely doesn't like being there. It's pressurized work. We're getting executives coming along saying, "When's my systems going to be back?" You've got insurance companies in the mix asking questions. You've got your customers asking you what's going on. I did a speech recently at an event that I was at, and one of our customers who'd actually had a right of boom experience did a little talk for me, and it wasn't very pleasant experience that they went through. But like most people, when they've been burgled, they buy the burglar alarm after. And he has now, they now have bought Blackpoint, and they've implemented some of our beyond support package. So, they've now done a lot of the things they should have done left of boom. So I guess he doesn't want to be in the boom situation again. I think we're almost starting to wrap up, Robert. Is there anything else you want to kind of get across before I sort of close things off?
The biggest thing is honestly what you just said, right? So I am not in the business of fear mongering. I'm not in the business to go out and say, hey, the world is a very scary place. It may be true that the world is a very scary place, and there's a lot of threat actors that are, it's interesting because I think a lot of times we have this perception that, a threat actor, they might be someone that they have a hoodie on and maybe they're in their parents' basement, right? And they're looking to see what they can do. That's not the reality, though. There are threat actors in different parts of the world that they go to work to do malicious activity against different businesses, right? Their job, just like all of us, they go into the office every day and their job is honestly to do this type of malicious activity. And so it is a full-time job that they're looking to do. And the biggest thing is that education of a little bit of prevention is worth a whole lot of cure, right? And it's true for anything. For any of you that have kids, right? I have 3 very young kids. I will tell you, depending on what game they are playing, a little bit of prevention can go a really long way of not having to do the cure, because a little bit of prevention can avoid a trip maybe to see a doctor, or a little bit of prevention can make sure that they're still safe. And so these conversations are extremely important, because too often I think that people think, well, that will never happen to me. That can't happen to me. But then once it happens to you, that right of boom state is not a pleasant state to be in, and
No.
will end up costing significantly more and be a lot larger of a nuisance than if we do a little bit of prevention up front to make sure that things are secure, to make sure that this type of activity can't happen.
Yeah. So just wrapping up, I mean, things like insurance policies, we're starting to see cyber insurance insisting that you've got things like cyber essentials, like an MDR, and they're all kind of linked, really. So you can't really have cyber essentials unless you've got MDR. There's lots of interdependencies between these things. So you should be doing it from a responsible business point of view anyway, I think. But there is some legislation. If you're on certain frameworks, you might need to have MDR, your cyber insurance, etc. But you definitely want to get yourself left of boom, and I really like that concept, Robert. No one has asked any questions, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I know there's quite a lot to take in, but I think, what I would like to do is we'll reach out to you anyway and get your take on what you've thought of this afternoon. It is quite a dry subject. Forgive me, Robert. I know that you live and breathe it, but it is a really serious subject. So we'll reach out and we'll get your understanding of kind of what you want to do next. These solutions aren't particularly onerous in terms of the professional services engagement to implement them either. We're not talking about weeks and weeks worth of consultancy time to implement these things. We're talking days to get these things in, and they can provide real value straight away. Like Robert says, the start, 1 in 5 organizations that implement this discover that there's something nefarious in their environment. So I don't want you to think this is a huge professional services engagement. The way you consume it is typically per user. So however many users you've got in your environment. There are some other aspects we need to take into account as in how many devices we want to collect logs from, firewall switches, things like that. So, but there is a starting point with this, and you can grow into it. It's not a massively expensive solution either, in comparison to the cost that it would be if you ever had a compromise. So it's easy to consume, easy to understand, and we're right behind Blackpoint as well. We've got many deployments of Blackpoint now, and if any of you know my counterpart on a technical level, Russell Henderson, you'll know he's a very hard taskmaster. So, if we for 1 minute thought that Blackpoint didn't cut the mustard, then we wouldn't be introducing you to them. So we're really behind Blackpoint as well. So thank you very much for taking your time today. And if you've got any other questions, then let me know. But thanks for joining us.